Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Today, our pleasure to welcome in someone whose work I've been reading a long time, although I don't know I've ever had him on a show before. It is my pleasure to welcome in from the Washington Post, their sports enterprise reporter, Michael Lee. Michael, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I am doing well. Very excited to have you on the show. So we just kind of went through a lot of the fundamentals, a lot of the the structure of kind of what's going on with the Qatari investment into Monumental Sports with Eben Novy-Williams from Sportico, who is a sports business reporter who broke the news. But what I wanted to get with you to talk about, on top of some basketball stuff that we'll get to, is kind of what this all means, what this means for the Wizards, what this means for Monumental, what this means for the NBA, what this means for American sports. So when you hear this news that it's a passive, investment, that it's non-controlling, it's only 5%, what do you make of that?
That is the tip of the iceberg. You know that this is going to become really huge down the road, and I think we've sort of entered this phase in professional sports, or just sports in general, where the masks are coming off, and like we now understand that these are business enterprises that are focused on making money. There are some lessons you can take from being in sports. A lot of lessons about character and morality from playing sports or participating in sports. There's a lot of things that you can look to athletes for admiration in terms of how they recover from adversity. And so there are things about sports that are still good and decent, but these are businesses, and their purpose is to make money. And that's clear when you see now how sports leagues are now getting in bed with sports betting, which is something that used to be taboo. We always knew that people bet on sports, and that led to the interest in sports, and that kept people, watching football games on Sundays and, reading the lines and all that thing. That drove it, but it was sort of a wink and an eye. We are not a part of it. Now sports leagues are diving headfirst into that. Same way in college athletics. We always knew that athletes were getting paid, but before it was under the table. Now it's over the table. It's name, image, likeness. And so everything that, we used to kind of, sort of turn a blind eye to and say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Now it's in our face that these sports leagues and these teams now are looking at every possible revenue stream. Doesn't matter that the franchise valuations are what they are. Doesn't matter that they're worth more than they've ever been. Doesn't matter that teams are making more money than they've ever made. There's always more money that can be entered into the pot, and you see it now with this investment into the Monumental Sports. You see it now with the PGA merging with Live. It doesn't really matter where the money comes from. It doesn't matter how seedy it may look on the outside. In the end, people are pocketing money, and that's really what it's all about.
Michael Lee from the Washington Post with us. I feel like there should be some middle ground, though, Michael, where we can accept this as a business and, people are allowed to make money. Billionaires shouldn't just have to fund our hobby. But at the same token, there's a real, human toll to the things that are attempting to be sports washed here. Do you, where do you try to draw the line, or is the line so blurry and so slippery that it is just impossible? And once you accept the fact that this is a business, there is no limit there.
Yeah, like I said, I think now, there are a lot of, compromises that you make every day. There are people, you wear Nike shoes and you know how they're made, but you don't really care how they're made because you like they look good on your feet, right? And so you can sort of say, well, I don't want to just not wear shoes, or I don't want to watch sports because there's something that goes on that I don't, that don't line up with my values. You just if you want to participate in this, you just kind of have to accept that there are parts of it that aren't pretty. I remember just from covering sports all this time, always no one wants to see the sausage being made. No one wants to see what goes on fully behind the scenes for fans. They just want to see a good product, and they want to be entertained. And so a lot of times when we expose how the sausage is made, fans get upset because they don't want to hear negative things about their heroes, or things that might diminish them in their eyes, and how they carry themselves or how they move. And so I guess the less you know, the better for some people, because you just want to just watch the game and not have to think about any political ramifications or any kind of seedy dealings of the people who are investing in these teams. So I think that's sort of the deal that all sports fans make. There are just certain compromises and things that you're willing to accept to move forward, because if you wanted to dig and find a problem with just about every team or every league, you could. If you could talk about the NBA, and in a lot of ways they are a progressive league and they support their players on social issues, but then they're also doing business in China, where they have a lot of human rights issues that they're dealing with over there that could make you be upset with the NBA and being in there. But again, the NBA is about making money. This is a business. And so there is something that can be gained from, like I said, participating in sports and watching sports. But there also is a dark side to that, and that's the business side of it. And I think that if you dig in too deep, you might wind up in an area that you don't want to be in.
Yeah, no, for sure. Michael Lee, Washington Post, with us. What do you think, or how do you think both Ted Leonsis and Adam Silver and WNBA brass handle it if, say, Natasha Cloud speaks up and is like, I don't like this. I don't want to play for an organization that has Qatari money in it, or if this starts getting onto the NBA side of things, which obviously it is with the Wizards right now. I don't think they have a whole lot of star power. But let's say next year they draft Bronny. LeBron's like, well, I want to play with Bronny, but I don't want to play for the organization with the Qatari money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do they handle it, especially if some of their louder voices, some of their bigger personalities start speaking out and pushing back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's part of the territory, and I think that it'll be a storyline for however long they want it to be, right? And people have short memories. People don't hold on to these things very long, and for as short as memories are, bank accounts can be much longer. So I think that's what they're counting on, that you can be upset for one news cycle, but, the money that's invested into your company is going to continue to grow, for the years that people, and by the end, you'll have more money and people will have no memory of what occurred. And I think that's sort of what Qatar is hoping for. They already have hosted the World Cup, and I think going into that, there were a lot of stories about, migrant workers and the abuse and the conditions that they dealt with to get all these soccer fields built. And everyone just like, okay, fine. But didn't we get a great World Cup final with France and Argentina? I mean, it was fantastic, right? So I think that, when you just sort of look at the entertainment value of sports, the money that's going to be made, if you're willing to get in bed with it, you will have probably a negative backlash. You will get some negative attention. You will get people upset, and they will call you out on it. But as time moves on, people will turn the page, and they will either forget about it, or there'll be that lonely voice that's holding on to something that everybody else has moved on past.
All right, Michael.
I think that's what all these teams are sort of banking on. These
right.
teams, these leagues are like, yeah, be mad. Go ahead and get it all out. Because once it's out of your system, we're going to keep making this money.
Right, and that's exactly what your colleague Candace Parker, or sorry, not Candace Parker, Candace Buckner.
Candace Buckner.
Yeah, wrote about.
She did an excellent column, laid it out perfectly.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to Vegas this week and going to visit Friend with the Aces. Candace Parker's clearly on my brain right now. Candace Buckner, who wrote about this in the Post. Michael Lee with
great
us.
Candaces.
Yeah, Candace, clearly, great name. Candace Buckner, phenomenal. Candace Parker, great. It's kind of the end of my list of Candaces, but that's fine. Michael, not only, of course, great sports enterprise reporter now at the Post, covered the NBA for a long, long time. So I did want to get a couple of basketball thoughts on you, mainly what you think about what the Wizards are doing. I think it's interesting, Michael, that they bring in Jordan Poole. Everyone kind of thought they just bought him out. Like, let's bring in no talent, no long-term contracts. And all of a sudden they acquire this soon-to-be 24-year-old, or maybe he already turned 24. I know this is age 24 season with 4 years left on this contract. He's got a ton of upside, but is also potentially a good player right now, maybe too good in the eyes of some Wizards fans who want them to completely tank. What have you made of kind of the sequence of moves here and ultimately the ending spot, or at least this close to ending spot with free agency still around the corner?
Well, I love what they're doing. It takes a lot of guts to just say, we're just going to hit the reset button. I mean, and I think anybody who's upset with the direction of the franchise right now needs to figure out, like, where were they headed before all these moves were made. I mean, this was a lottery team. They've been in the lottery consistently for the last 5 years, or they had that one playoff appearance, but, that felt kind of fluky with Russ being here. But I think overall this has been a mediocre to below average team. And so if you have a bad basketball team, you can't just keep, doubling down on the same mistakes and just keep spending money and then going in a direction that's going to take you nowhere. At some point, you got to pivot and do something differently. So I love the fact that they weren't afraid to trade Bradley Beal, that they were able to turn Kristaps Porzingis potentially leaving as a free agent and flipping him and getting assets out of him. And I just think that I like what they're doing. They're betting on young guys. They're taking a chance on risks that are worthwhile. I mean, I think Jordan Poole, he had a down year last year, but I also believe there were a lot of factors that played into him having a bad year, namely being punched by his teammate and his teammate not really getting punished to any kind of type of severity. But he also contributed to a team that won a championship. And I think he's going to love the freedom that he has, playing in Washington. And I think he'll add some level of excitement. I think that the team that's the sad part about the Wizards over the last 5 or 6 years is that they have been boring in addition to being bad. And like, you got to pick one. Like, you can be the Spurs and be great and boring, but you can't be bad too. Like, you got to give me something to get excited about. You got to give me some hope that you're headed somewhere. And the Wizards provided nothing. They provided no hope, no wins, no buzz, and just dudes out there playing basketball. And that's a miserable place to be. At least now the fans, if you might be upset that they didn't trade Brad 3 years ago like they should have, or that they, have sort of wasted fans, the last couple of years on a bad product. But at some point you got to just say, okay, enough. We don't need to worry about all the assets we get for this and that. Just say enough. We're done going down this path. We have to try something new. I love that they're trying something new. I love that they're, accumulating, second round picks and, getting, draft switch swaps. I think that's a great direction for the franchise. They have to be willing to do something bold. I like the direction that they're taking. And if you're a fan and you're disappointed in this, I'll just say it can get worse, but at least you have the hope that it can get better. And for the previous 3 years, they couldn't even provide that. Like, there was going to be a dreadful 4 years for as long as they had to pay Brad that salary, and with no ability to build around him a confident roster. So moving on from him was great for him too, because now he actually gets a chance to play for something that matters. And I think, for him, he can also improve aspects of his game that probably were able to let slide, playing for a team that wasn't going to win anything. So I love what's happening right now with the Wizards. I think that providing hope is really all you can sell to fans when you can't sell them wins. And there hasn't been a hopeful period for this franchise in a long time.
No doubt. And the fact that I think that's the thing that gets kind of underscored in all of this. Like you said, there was no way for them to actually build around him. There's no way to acquire the kind of talent they needed to build a winner that included Bradley Beal. So then the question becomes, in the rebuild, Michael, how bad should they be trying to be? And I worded the question that way specifically, trying to be, because there's this thought for some that say you have to bottom out. Like, you have to, whatever year it was where the Sixers won 10 games. Like, you got to be that team. And there's other people that are like, no, tanking's for losers. It's such a bad culture. You can't go all the way. If you happen to lose, that's fine, but there needs to be some level of try. Where are you on kind of the try to be bad versus we don't care if we're good scale, if you will?
Well, I think that, there's, like I said, you can go any number of ways, but I think that if you, kind of build a culture of losing, that you stay in that place for a long time. It's really hard to get out of it. It's a lot harder to build from the middle. A lot harder to build from the bottom than from the middle. If you look at the Denver Nuggets, they had a couple lottery seasons in there, right? And they got Jamal Murray, obviously, in the lottery, but they also hit, on Jokic. They took a risk on Michael Porter Jr. at the 14th pick. And so if you look at how their roster is being built, it wasn't built by having a bunch of number one picks. If you look at the Golden State Warriors, they built with Steph Curry at 7, Klay Thompson at 11, Draymond Green in the second round. And so you look at the teams that are winning championships, it's not the teams that are just accumulating all these number one picks, because if you are accumulating those number one picks, chances are you've been really bad and that you've sort of just been used to losing. And so when you bring one of these talented players into a losing culture, it's hard for one player to expunge all that from your system. And sometimes they can get caught up in that losing system and that losing culture. So I think if your main focus as an organization is to develop a winning culture, drafting guys from winning schools, signing guys who've had a history of success with successful organizations, getting veterans in there who know what it takes to win. And so if you surround these young guys with winners, eventually you have a winning mentality and you can sort of build towards becoming a contender down the road. If you just tank and just say we're going to bottom out and just lose a bunch of games, the downside is that you don't have enough of an infrastructure in place that once you start getting good players that you can just flip the switch and all of a sudden get good. And you can see it, like, as far as, what you say about the process, they got an MVP in Joel Embiid, but they've never gotten past the second round. They still aren't a championship contender 10 years after the fact. So you look at that and you're like, well, dang, they had Ben Simmons, they had Markelle Fultz, they had all these number one picks, and all they have left is Joel Embiid and a team that can't get past the second round. So you got to ask yourself, the teams that have been winning, the Toronto Raptors, the last couple championships, other than the Lakers, everybody else has been building through, quality draft picks and a great culture. And that's what you really have to establish if you're going to have sustained success, because you may have that one championship like the Lakers, and then you bottom out, and then you're not really, you're not, it's not sustained. But if you want to have a sustained run and just sort of always be in contention, that comes from building a strong culture. And I think that's what the Wizards are trying to establish now, is a strong culture. So you don't want to be so bad that even talent can't reverse it. You just want to be, you want to make sure your culture is so good that anybody that can come in can be a part of that and help elevate you.
I agree with your conclusion. I am curious to double click on the Sixers thing real quick, though, because I would argue and have that a team that's won 50 games 4 times in the last 6 years and has been on the wrong end of some pretty gut-wrenching and you could even say unlucky in terms of the Kawhi shot defeats in deciding games is there. I would say they've been a contender. So I was just going to say, like, how much do you think that, kind of the process of getting here, no pun intended, affects their ability to perform in those situations where perhaps you define them as someone who's not a legitimate contender?
Well, I'm not saying they're not a contender. I'm just saying they haven't won anything.
Sure.
So if you haven't won, then what's the purpose? Like, what are you in this for? Just to be in contention, or to actually get through to the conference finals at least, or get through to the NBA finals? I think that's the one thing that's lacking from that whole rebuild, is that they've cycled in all this talent, and they've had Embiid, who's become an MVP. But what do they have to show for it other than Embiid's MVP? I mean, a couple of 50-win seasons is nice, but who remembers that? We remember the champions. We remember that the Raptors beat them and got lucky, but they also got a ring. And so, and again, the Raptors had established a culture for a long time. They kept getting to the playoffs, and losing to LeBron. Then LeBron went to the West, and they got Kawhi, and they won a championship. But the culture was in place, so that when Kawhi got there, he was the talent that pushed them over the hump to where they could finally get that championship they were in pursuit of. But the culture was already there and established. And so I think that's what I'm talking about in terms of having a winning culture where your stars are accountable, your stars are willing to make sacrifices and do what's needed to win. And I think that comes from building from the middle in a lot of ways, where you're not going to luck into the number one pick and then just hope that they lead you to a championship. You're just going to have a nice culture that when you add these players, you can develop them. They can become stars within your culture. Look at Miami. I mean, when's the last time Miami had a number one pick? The highest they went was number 2, and it turned out to be Michael Beasley. But I'm just saying in general, like they're not typically in the lottery, but their culture means that they're always going to be playing for something, even if they're not winning the whole thing. And I think that's what you really want as an organization, is to actually get to the finish line. Somebody may pass you once you get there, but at least you're right there, as opposed to just hoping you get lucky.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think culture.
Go ahead, make your point. Go ahead, say what you're saying.
So like culture is incredibly important. It's something that over the last 10 years of doing this, it is something that I've become, I think, even more of an advocate for, is like getting, Channing Frye calls them connectors, like what he was in 2016, and having the right vets in the right places. But I just think, like Philly to me is such a uniquely weird example, because I look at what has gone wrong for them, and I think it is so incredibly, on one hand, unlucky. Like, how could they know that Ben Simmons would just completely implode as a basketball player after being a borderline defensive player of the year? And also self-owns, because like I just think they made bad coaching decisions along the way. I think they made bad executive decisions along the way, moving on from the people who initially built that roster and probably had a longer-term plan for it, from Brett Brown to Sam Hinkie to obviously Doc Rivers has been a really notoriously awful coach in the playoffs, and that's the guy they hired to take them home. So I look at a team like Philly specifically and go, they did so much right. And, like, there's always going to be luck involved. They maximize their chances to get lucky, and that lands them in Embiid, despite missing on Nerlens Noel and Michael Carter-Williams and Markelle Fultz. And they are still right there, even if they haven't completed it yet. Like, and then if you want to talk about, like, the culture stuff, they messed up not keeping Jimmy. They messed up on some personnel decisions. But I actually don't think it was early in that process necessarily versus later in it, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I understand all that, but I also know that, this is a, results league, and, all the stuff you mentioned is all fine and dandy, it's all accurate, it's all true. But again, what are the results? I mean, and I say building from the middle and also from a culture, you can look at Milwaukee as well. Their best player is Giannis, who was the 15th pick. And so, they were able to build around him and find the right pieces. But again, you had that superstar guy who, and you're building from the middle. They weren't a great team. They weren't a really awful team. They were just somebody that got lucky with their draft pick, and luck plays a big part in all this.
Right.
And that's why I think getting so many draft picks and having a lot of swings, sort of helps you, because you're going to miss. The draft is such a weird process. Because like I was watching the draft Thursday, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, if you go through every draft, there's probably only like 3 or 4 like Hall of Famers in this class, right? Like there's never going to be a class that just everybody hits. So like who are going to be the great players out of these 60 players or 58 players that get drafted today? Like we get so excited about the future and everything, but only a handful are really going to be all-time greats. And so it's such a strange thing to put everything into the draft. And the other thing too about like I think Victor Wembanyama might have got it that breaks through, but if you look at since 1990, number one picks does not mean that he's going to wind up leading your franchise to a championship, because you got Tim Duncan, right? He was with the Spurs and he won championships there,
right? And
then you got LeBron, who won a championship somewhere and then came back to win with Kyrie. So you had 3 number one picks win with the franchise that drafted them, and that's Kyrie, LeBron, who left and came back, and then Tim Duncan. And that's since 1990. That's 33 years. So we've had a number of number one picks, a number of excitement, a number of guys that got people buzzing about what direction they were headed. But not many of them have wound up leading their franchise to the promised land, especially the one that drafted them. So that's why I say that, the draft is good. Losing is fine if you want to accumulate talent. But the Wizards have already done that. They got John Wall as the number one pick. They got Bradley Beal as the number 3 pick, and their ceiling was the second round. So try something new. Let's see how it works out and go from there.
Yeah, totally. And I did a segment on Friday talking about how player development is going to be the key to their future more than drafting, more than scouting. And I think that's also kind of what you're saying here is like, yeah, you get because if the Bucks knew that Giannis was going to be this good, they would have traded up to the number 1 pick to get him. And that's kind of the trick of it all. Is like nobody's like, yeah, we want to pick 9th because that's where the best player is. You just got to get the right guy in the right system, and them's the breaks of the NBA. Michael, this was great. Hope to have you back at some point soon. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you down the line.
For sure, anytime. Thanks for having me on.
All right, this is Michael Lee, everybody, Washington Post sports enterprise reporter.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.